Wow. Well, how is everybody? I think we asked that like 20 times in every one of our services. I'm just waiting for the day someone says, my life sucks. Thank you for not saying that. Guys, my name's Dave. I'm one of the pastors around here. Every week we start the exact same way. We say hello to our different campuses. So for those who are watching in Kenosha, hello to you, to Racine Campus, hi, our online campus, which is all around the world. And of course, to those of you in the auditorium with me right now, come on. Love the energy at all times. So here's the deal. A couple weeks ago, we kicked off this series called Guardrails. And what we said was guardrails are an incredibly important part of our driving experience because they put margin between us and the danger zone. Now, none of us want to drive on roads like this, right? These guys are driving in the Himalaya mountains, and obviously they don't have a lot of space between where they're at in the drop-off. And so that's why we're doing this series, because we're saying, hey, we're smart enough to say we're not going to drive like that. But it's very easy for us to live our lives that way. And so in week one of the series, what we talked about was how guardrails aren't just an important part of driving, they're an important part of life, and we define guardrails this way. We said guardrails are self-imposed standards of behavior that direct and protect our life. That's what they are. They're not laws. They're not rules. They are self-imposed standards of behavior. They're things that we make a matter of conscience or in order to direct and protect us. And the reason we need guardrails is, the guardrails aren't about the obvious things in life, right? Don't kill, don't steal, don't hate people. Guardrails are about the gray areas in life that, there aren't Bible verses that are very clearly laid out and what we should do and how we should live. And so we just said, hey, we're going to live wisely. We're going to establish guardrails. And here's what we know about guardrails. When you hit a guardrail with your vehicle, you're probably going to do some damage. You'll do damage to your car. You'll do damage to your body. But it's not near the amount of damage you would do if you went flying off the bridge, right? It's not near the amount of damage you would do if you went plowing into oncoming traffic. Until 3,000 years ago, King Solomon of Israel writes these words. It's a key verse of our series. A wise person foresees danger and takes precautions. The foolish goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. Setting up guardrails is taking precaution. Now, last week, we talked about the importance of doing this in the area of our friendships. And I'm going to try to be really cognizant today of talking a little bit slower and not yelling as much. I had people say to me last week, man, it feels like you just yell at us the whole time. And I said, it's passion. I can't help it, right? I just get so intense about this stuff. But we said last week, we need guardrails in the area of our friendships. Specifically, what that means is we need to limit time, not stay away from completely, but limit time with people whose lives are moving in the opposite direction of ours. And that's not being mean, right? That's not being judgmental. That's using good judgment. That's just being wise. And the entire reason that we're even doing this series, if you just get to the root of it, is because all of us have regrets in life that, quite honestly, could have been avoided. Consequences we would never have had to suffer if we would have had guardrails in place. And so today, I want to talk about another area of life in which to establish guardrails, something that applies to all of us, and that's in the area of our time. And I'm actually going to only give you 2 guardrails today. And we're going to do it at the very, very end of the talk, because really what I want to do for the entire talk is try to motivate you, try to get you excited, try to stir you up, try to help you understand why establishing guardrails in our time and with our schedule is a very important thing. Now, if you've ever seen the TV show Hoarders, it's a little disturbing. I actually, one of my daughters lived like this for a little while. I wish I would have had pictures of her own room. It's cleaned up now. But the thing about Hoarders, if you've seen this show, it's very, very disturbing to watch because for whatever reason, people have gotten to the place in their life where they can't throw anything out. And so it doesn't matter that they have mice in their house or rats or cockroaches. It's just too much anxiety for them to throw anything else. And of course, if you're watching it, you also have anxiety. You're saying, man, I could never live like this. It would drive me crazy. How many of you would hate living like this? Trick question, because the reality is we all live like this with our schedules. right? If you were just to dissect your schedule, and if you were to look at it, the majority of us, I wouldn't say maybe all of us, but the majority of us have jam-packed schedules, and our time is just go, go, go. And so just for fun, I'm going to do a little survey here real quick, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. No, nobody likes to raise their hand, all right? But I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and be honest with me. And if you're watching at one of our campuses, I want you to play along, all right? If you're sitting at home watching online with your boxers, just do this in your mind. You don't have to raise your hand. But this is going to help us gauge the pace of life that we are living our lives at, all right? I'm going to read 8 different statements. I just want you to raise your hand if you would say, yeah, I'm guilty, all right? How many of you would say, I've cut through a gas station or a parking lot to avoid stopping at a red light? Shame on all of you. Yeah, shame on all of you. Here we go, number 2. How many would admit, I don't like to take vacations where there isn't always something to do? All right, not as many, all right? But there's some people, it's just, I got to go, go, go. Here we go. Question number 3. How many would admit, I frequently look at my phone for no apparent reason? Yeah, doesn't matter where you're at, just kind of check the phone. Number 4, I often switch lines because I think the one I'm in is too slow. Yeah, all right. Now, this next one, you may have to raise it again. I believe God makes whatever line I'm in the slowest. There is a conspiracy theory against the Almighty. All right, here we go. Question or number 6. When I go to sleep, my mind often rehearses all the things I haven't got done that day or I have to do tomorrow. Your mind's going. Yeah, a lot of us. Here we go. Number 7. I have difficulty finding time for things like paying bills or going to the doctor. Well, you got 2 hands up here. Oh, you're like, hallelujah, man. It's just turned into a Pentecostal church. All right, and then number 8. People who talk slowly irritate me. Yeah, where every word is like a sentence. You know who irritates me? People who listen to podcasts at normal speed. Because I've trained my mind to listen to it, true story, at double speed. I listen to every podcast at full-on double speed. It's just something I've trained myself to do. But I think we understand what it's like to live life at fast pace all the time. And there's actually a really good reason for it. This isn't shame on us and we're horrible people, we live in America, and no, I'm going to tell you what it is. It's called the fear of missing out. This is legit. It's been around for a couple decades now. It's called FOMO. The fear of missing out, right? The uneasy and sometimes all-consuming feeling that you're missing out. This is so easy to get trapped in because when you look at social media, and I know some of you have resisted the demon of social media, right? You still have stayed, okay, good for you. Right? But when you look at social media, here's the deal, guys. We look at the highlight reel of everybody's life, and all that happens in our mind is saying, I wish I had that. I wish I had their life. I wish I could do that. It's always reminding us of what we're missing out on. That beach vacation, that mountain vacation. Oh, I'm missing out on blemish-free skin. I'm missing out on bigger muscles. By the way, can somebody call a plumber? Because these pipes are about to burst. Sorry, so dumb. We're missing out on invitations. That was the dumbest thing we've ever said here. I'm missing out on followers. I'm missing out on friends. I'm missing out on a date. I'm missing out on romance and happiness and purpose. And our constant angst keeps us from being able to rest. We're always chasing something. It's just human nature. And consequently, our schedules have gotten out of control and we're suffering because of it. When we have very little margin in our schedule and we do not live with intentionality, here's what happens. We're tired a lot. We're irritable. We're prone to depression. We struggle with anxiety. We're sick. We don't think clearly, right? We make unwise decisions. And I think one of the worst consequences is that the most important relationships in our life begin to suffer. It's like, Mom, you're always on the phone. Dad, you're always behind the computer. Right? I feel like your body's here, but you're never present with me. And so for most of us, we live at this pace where our tendency is to only rest when we're completely exhausted. Our tendency is to do so much in life that we don't even enjoy much of life. We drive fast, we eat in our cars, it's go. And internally, we know like something's wrong, right? And we feel this conflict. We're working and we think, I really should be at home right now. We're at home and we're thinking, I really should be working. And then on top of that, I know I should be spending time with friends. And I know I should make time for hobbies. And I know I should be getting more rest. This is the reason we need guardrails. As our schedules go, our life goes. As our schedule goes, our life goes. Now, the great thing about this topic, this isn't true about everything we teach at Great Lakes Church, but there are some topics, it really doesn't even matter where you're at in your spiritual journey, you can benefit from what we talk about. Absolutely true. So, regardless of what you believe in God, regardless of whether you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, maybe you're at this place where you're like, I'm just kind of trying to figure all of this stuff out. Here's what I can assure you. This really ancient collection of books that we call the Bible, it speaks a lot about time. It speaks about prioritizing time. It speaks about getting rest with our time. It speaks a whole lot about time. And you can benefit if you just open your heart and hear what is talked about in regards to time. And if we wanted, we could look at literally hundreds of different verses today because there's so much written about time. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at a small section of verses in the book of Psalms. Now, if you're at all familiar with Psalms, you might know that King David of Israel wrote the vast majority of them. He was the second king of Israel. He wrote the majority of the Psalms. But here's the deal. He didn't write all of them. In fact, the verses we're going to look at today were not written by David. They were written by Moses. All right, Moses is a legend among the Jewish people because Moses is the person that God used to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt after they had been slaves there for more than 400 years. Moses was the person who leads the Israelites into a land of their own with laws of their own. So this guy is a really, really big deal. And it's at the end of Moses' life where he's kind of looking back and reflecting that he decides to write on this topic of time. And what he wrote ended up in the book of Psalms, which of course ended up in our Bible. And the reason it's worth paying attention to what Moses wrote on time is because if you were just to look at Moses' life, he really lived 4 different lives. This guy knows a lot about time. Life number 1, Moses was raised as royalty. That's how his life started out. Okay, pretty much right after he was born, he was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter and raised as an Egyptian. Now, Pharaoh is the title that was given to the political and religious leader in Egypt. Okay, so Moses ends up being raised in Pharaoh's household. He's living the good life. He wakes up every day and he's treated like royalty. I mean, he's eating Chick-fil-A for lunch. He's got big screen TVs everywhere he looks, right? He's got all sorts of video game systems. He gets to get in any kind of car he wants. He is living the good life. But then he makes a decision in which he falls out of favor with Pharaoh's household. One day, just a fit of passion, he sees an Egyptian mistreating an Israelite and he kills the Egyptian. Bad decision on his part. Now he's out of favor with Pharaoh's household, so he leaves Egypt. He's a fugitive, and he's basically on the run for his life, which leads to his second life. Moses was a shepherd. So he goes from living like royalty to now being a shepherd. He spends his days watching sheep. Every day just felt like it was being lived in slow motion. Right? He just kind of watched the sun go across the sky. He'd get up early in the morning, and he'd take the sheep out and he'd bring them out to pasture and he'd let them feed all day. And then at the end of the day, he'd put them back into the pen. And then the very next day, he'd get up and it was like life was a broken record. It was just on repeat, doing the same thing over and over and over. Moses did not know his own story. Okay, he didn't know how it was going to unfold. And so Moses, for 40 years, is thinking, this is it. I'm watching sheep. I'm going to die watching sheep. My kids are going to know my name. My grandkids may know my name. But after that, ain't nobody going to ever talk about Moses. He had no clue that thousands of years later, we'd be talking about him. Then he goes into the third part of his life. And this is when Moses returns to Egypt. If you've ever seen the movie Prince of Egypt, you'll remember this. Moses returns to Egypt after being gone for 40 years, and he says to the leader of Egypt, right? He says to Pharaoh, time's up. The Israelites have been slaves for more than 400 years, and it's time to let them go. And he's terrified, he's afraid, he's not confident when he speaks, but God uses Moses for one of the biggest events in world history to free the people of Israel from slavery after hundreds and hundreds of years. And that eventually leads to the fourth part of his life, and that was Moses becomes the leader of the Israelites. He's the guy who leads the Israelites to the edge of what was referred to as the promised land. The Jewish people knew someday that's going to be where we live. That was their future home. And what's fascinating is when you look at a map of Israel today, it actually falls into where the original promised land was located. So Israel's part of that original promised land property. It's just fascinating that this many years later, we can still look at a map and see this. And so in many ways, Moses had 4 different lives. He had a very unique perspective on time. Now, it's possible when you look at your life, it's possible that you feel like you've lived many lives, right? You were single, you got married, maybe you got divorced, maybe you got remarried, right? Different lives. Or maybe you said, man, of course, for many years I didn't have kids, but then I had kids and that became a whole different life for you. And then maybe your kids left the home, and so that became a whole different life. And then it's possible those same kids move back into home, and you're like, oh, here we go, another life being lived all over again, right? I feel like I'm rewinding time. Or maybe you went through a long period of your life where you had nothing, and now God has blessed you in ways you never thought possible. So you're just living a different life. There are so many different seasons that we live in life. And Moses, here he is at the end, he's looking back on his life, and here's what he writes. He writes, Lord, through all the generations, you have been our home. Lord, as I think back of the hundreds of years that Israel has been a nation, I know we've never had our own land. We've never had our own property. But you've always been our home. You've always watched over us. You've always protected us. You've always looked out for us. You've been our home. Then he continues. He says, before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, from beginning to end, you are God. Moses says, if you were to stretch out time in opposite directions, somewhere in the middle is my life. Right? So I just brought some rope up here. Right? If this was the beginning of time, and over here, this was the end of time, oh man, this is getting dangerous up here, right? And so if you had this, and these were, he says, right here in the middle, this is me. I'm just a fraction. There's so many years that I'm not a part of. God, I'm just a small little part of history. But you are a part of all of history. He continues. He says, you turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. That doesn't sound awesome. Now, this is kind of an offensive sounding statement, right? It raises a whole lot of questions, right? Does God kill us? Does God cause things to happen that end our life? Does God just predetermine the amount of time that we're here on earth? Does he know how many days we're going to live? Like, what does that mean? And I honestly don't know. But here's what I do know, and that is for most of us, we believe that God has something to do with the amount of time that we're on this planet. Even if you're not a follower of Jesus, there's something internal. And the reason I say that, I'm not trying to be like overly aggressive and offensive, is if you were diagnosed today with something terminal, or someone you love was diagnosed with something terminal, my guess is you would quickly begin to pray. You may not consider yourself a prayer. You may not even remember the last time you prayed, but at least something in you would be like, oh God, help me. I'm scared. If you're out there somewhere, right? There's something in us that believes that God is somewhat in charge of the amount of time that we're on this earth. He ultimately has control. And then Moses continues. He says, for you, God, 1,000 years are as a passing day, as brief as a few hours in the night. Like God, when I look at my life, I feel like it's so long, but for you, it's just, there's so much space, there's so much time. It's eternity to eternity. It just goes on and on and on and on. Moses continues. He says, you sweep people away like dreams that disappear. They are like grass that springs up in the morning. In the morning, it blooms and flourishes, but by evening, it is dry and withered. Here's what Moses is saying. He's saying, you ever celebrate the birth of a baby? Of course you have, right? Even if it's a niece or nephew or grandkid, like you've celebrated the birth of a baby. Why are we all excited when babies are born? Because they're innocent and they have their whole life ahead of them. And it's like, wow, look at this. Moses says they're like this little blade of grass that's just come up in the morning. But by the evening, it's dry and withered and going away. Isn't that motivating? So exciting. Right? What feels like a decent amount of time to us, like 70, 80 years from God's perspective, is just a couple hours. My grandma, who attends our church, she just celebrated her 91st birthday. My only prayer is, God, do not let me live to 91. No, but here's the deal. She just celebrated. That's a long time. But Moses says, well, it's really a fraction of time. And then Moses writes this: 70 years are given to us. Some even live to 80, some to 91. But even the best years are filled with pain and trouble. Soon they disappear and we fly away. If you think you've had a difficult life, and it's very possible you have, Moses says, yeah, me too. He experienced many difficult seasons. He went from living like royalty to watching over sheep. Moses says, regardless of what the seasons of your life look like, before you know it, it's over. And it is good for us to pause every so often like this and to reflect on the brevity of life. Because when we remind ourselves that our time is limited, it will indirectly, and eventually it's going to directly impact what we decide to do with our time. Now, I don't know if you've ever even heard of this website. It's kind of a morbid site. I went there this week. It's called deathclock.com. Deathclock.com. What you could do is you can put in the time you were born or the age, how old you are and all that stuff. You can put in basic health information and it will tell you, it will predict for you how long you will live. Now, I kind of cheated because I didn't put how much bacon I eat and I didn't say that I never exercise, right? But it told me that I will be living to Monday, April 12th, 2049. Okay, so I got a few years ahead of me. If your life expectancy was measured on a clock, here's what it would look like. 22 years old, it's 8:20 in the morning. You've got a good part of the day left to go. 32 years old, it's 11:20 in the morning. 42 years old, it's the afternoon, baby. 3:20 in the afternoon. Now, here we go. 52 years old, it's dinner time. It's 6:20. And the scary thing is if you're 62 years or older, it's 11:59 p.m. 11:59, I'm just making that one up. Grim Reaper's at your door. No, it's not that bad. But if you were to put your life on some sort of time, man, guys, it's ticking away. And as Moses reflects on the brevity of life, he writes something down as he continues his thoughts that we look at a couple times a year. To me, it is one of the greatest verses in all of the Bible because of how applicable it is to us and how practical. Here's what Moses writes next. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. In light of the fact that we're not going to live forever, Heavenly Father, teach us, Moses writes, teach us to number our days. Now, we know how to number our days. We do it all the time. When there's an important deadline, we count our days, right? If you were in elementary school and you can remember back that long ago, right? When you had just a couple months left until you were in middle school, you were counting down the days, right? Or a couple weeks left until summer break, you're counting down the days. At Christmas in some of our homes, we have these chocolate calendars, right? And what do? We start opening up right before Christmas and we're counting down. You get this little piece of chocolate that probably didn't cost even a penny to make. And we'll put it in your mouth, right? But we count them down. If you've ever been married, especially if you're the bride, you count down the days until the wedding. For those of you, you're just a year or two away from retirement. Man, I've seen some of you have apps on your phone. Look at how much longer I have to work for the man, right? And it's just like, man, over and over and over, we know how to count our days. And here's what Moses is encouraging us to do. He says, pause. Remember the brevity of life. To count our days shouldn't lead us to depression. It shouldn't lead us to anxiety or fear. It should lead us to wisdom. Wisdom is living today with tomorrow in mind. Wisdom is thinking through our schedule. It's thinking through, what should I put in? What should I leave out? What should I prioritize? Wisdom is understanding that my time is limited, so I need to limit my time. I need to protect it. Now, it's amazing how protective we are of different things in life. We definitely are protective of our money. right? We're protective of our emotions. We're protective sometimes of like other human beings, right? We're gonna be protective of our kids. The sweetest lady in the world, my mama bear, will come out. You start bullying that kid, right? That's just how we're built. And a couple days ago, my friend Stacy, who lives in the Minneapolis area, she put on social media how her family has spent a little bit of time this last week in the state of Illinois for a wedding. And she said, while we're there for a wedding, I get a call from a police officer in Minnesota. And apparently what they were doing was a welfare check on her son, Keegan, who was with the family. Here's what happened. The police department received a call from Keegan's friends because he was absent from school, he didn't ride the bus, and even though the car was in the driveway, nobody was answering the door. So the police showed up to the house. There were 11 boys in the driveway waiting for him, and they told the police officer they were absolutely sure that Keegan was dead because the word help was written in blood on Keegan's window. And so she said, we have to do a better job next year of picking out Halloween decorations. That was the window. Isn't that awesome? So she assured him, Keegan's fine, he's with us. It is amazing how protective we are of things in life. But when it comes to time, we tend to be passive. And if you haven't figured it out yet, everywhere we go in this world, there are people and there are events and there are tasks that have the ability to just suck the blood and the life out of our schedule. It's called time vampires. Email can be a time vampire. Social media, Netflix can be a time vampire. People can be time vampires. Meetings, to-do lists can be time vampires. And if we're not careful to eliminate time vampires from our life, we will stay incredibly busy. Go, 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 right? But we will accomplish very little. So the Apostle Paul, he writes, be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Now, regardless of what you're feeling right now, and maybe you're just looking at your life saying, man, I've just lived my life this way. I want you to know, regardless of how you've used time in the past, you can be wise, and I can be wise with how we use it in the future. When it comes to life, all of us essentially use time in one of three different ways. We waste it, right? That's where we just go through life and we indulge on ourselves and pretty much have a narcissistic type of life, and we just me, right? Or, and this is what most of us do, we spend it. We enjoy it with family and friends. We have a good time. We laugh. We do all those things. We spend it. But the third way to use the time is to invest it. That's to say, I'm going to be intentional. I'm going to prioritize. I'm going to be strategic with how I use my time. Now, because I know that you're all really, really smart people, and you, along with me, would say, man, I really want to invest my life. Here's my question. Outside of your immediate family, which is, it's important to invest in them, for sure. But outside of your immediate family, who in your life would say, hey, they invest in me? Who would look to you and say, man, they invest their time, they invest their knowledge, they invest in me as a person? Because at the end of our life, we don't want to have people say they wasted their life or they spent their life. Man, we had such good times together. At some point, we want someone to acknowledge and say, man, they invested their life. And that's not going to happen accidentally. It's going to happen with intentionality, which is why we need to establish guardrails. And I told you at the end of the talk, I'd give you 2 guardrails. So here it is, guardrail number 1. Determine what is most important. It's amazing how few human beings ever sit down and say, what is most important to me? But let me ask you, what are the things at the end of this year? What are the things at the end of this season? What are the things at the end of your education? What are the things at the end of 5 years of marriage or 10 years of marriage that you want to look back on and say, I prioritized, I put those things first. I didn't have to force things in and cram things in. I didn't have to live like a hoarder. I lived with those things in mind. So maybe for you, it's like, man, I want to be known as an encourager. So what would it look like if you just said, man, in my life, I'm going to make time every single week to just write 3 encouraging notes to people. I'm going to make time to make 3 phone calls to different people in my life just to encourage them. So at the end of my life, someone can say about me, that I invested in them and I built them up and I encouraged them. You have to determine what's most important. And along with determining what is most important, the second guardrail is just as critical. It's determine who is most important. And I'll just give you a hint. If you're married, your spouse is at the top of that list. If you've got kids, your kids are at the top of that list. Now, unfortunately, nobody's going to push you, right? Nobody's going to challenge you. Nobody is going to motivate you to try to prioritize correctly. It's got to be your decision. This is a self-imposed guardrail. And once you've established the guardrails, once you've determined what is most important to me and who is most important, it is up to you, it is up to me to give the majority of our time to living within that space. And if you choose to do that, right? You say, I want to live within that space. I promise you, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. You're going to have to say no to a lot of good things so you can say yes to the great things. Several years ago, I worked for a guy by the name of Mike Meeks in San Diego. And I've talked about Mike. He's spoken here at Great Lakes Church, had a huge impact on my life. He led the church that I was a part of in San Diego from about 150 to over 6,000 people. So he was here through the whole process. And one day I asked him, he still had a few years before he was going to step away from the lead pastor position. I said, so Mike, what's next for you? I said, I'm guessing 10,000 people. That's kind of the big goal. And Mike didn't even hesitate. He just said, no, that's not it. He said, Dave, what's next for me, what's most important for me in this season of my life is to invest in guys like you. So that's what he does. Invest in me, invest in my buddy Jeremiah up in Minneapolis, my buddy Tom Elmore out in Houston, Texas area, my buddy Brent Johnson out in the Tri-Cities area of the state of Washington, invest in James Grogan, the guy who replaced him as the lead pastor in San Diego. That's where he spends his time. So let me ask you, what's most important to you and who's most important? And once you determine those things, you just have to find a way to arrange your schedule to be able to prioritize what's most important. So here are some questions to consider. What do you need to add to your life? That you say, man, if that's most important, or if this is the person who's most important, here's what I need to add. Here's what I need to start doing that I'm not currently doing. Secondly, what do you need to subtract from your life? What do you need to just say, enough? Completely eliminate it, get rid of it. What do you maybe need to start doing more of? You're already doing some, but you're like, man, I really need to do more of this. And then what do you need to do less of? Not that it's bad, but maybe a little bit less Netflix, right? Maybe a little bit less golf, a little bit less, I was going to say hunting, but we don't want to take that away. But what is it that I need to add, subtract, do more of, and do less of? And whatever you decide, here's what guardrails should do in your life. Living with guardrails should replenish you physically, restore you emotionally, and renew you spiritually. So if you truly have what's most important, who's most important, you're living with those areas, you should be replenished physically, restored emotionally, and renewed spiritually, and you will not convince me that binge watching on Netflix is going to do that. And you're not going to convince me that, being on social media for an hour a day is going to do that. Now, I don't care what time of year we're talking about this. This is an important topic, but especially so going into the holiday season. Do not pack your life with so much stuff that you do not enjoy your life. Don't allow FOMO, the fear of missing out, to keep you from establishing guardrails and driving off the cliff and wrecking your life. I don't know what your schedule looks like. I'm guessing it's like mine. It's way too busy. It's way too chaotic. But regardless of what it looks like, I promise you, you can have a different life than you have now. You can have a more meaningful life. You can have a more purpose-filled life. But you have to establish guardrails. So may God teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I pray that as we look at our schedules this week and as we reevaluate our priorities and we try to determine what's most important and who's most important, that you would give us the wisdom to identify those things. And then give us the courage to establish guardrails so that we spend the majority of our time doing what matters. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. In Jesus' name, amen.